get to our second text in just a minute. What I realized this week for the first time is if this week someone comes to you and says, tell me about your faith, or lo and behold, tell me what the whole Christian thing is about. That could be a scary conversation. Hopefully it'd be a great opportunity. But if they came to you and said, I want to read something, you'd be well served to say, well, you should read a Bible. My pastor will give anyone a Bible who walks through the door. And they say, I don't really have time to read the whole thing. Tell you what, I'll read one chapter. And you're thinking, wow, that's it, one? I'm very busy, they'd say. Give me one chapter to read. By the way, I need someone to look up on their phone. I forgot. I think there's 1,100 chapters. Could someone Google right now how many chapters are in the Bible? Someone's got a phone. I think it's 1,100. It might be 1,400. It's something like that. They tell you, I'm busy. I've only got one chapter. Tell me what you're going to have me read. Gosh. And you're thinking, well, could have them read Genesis 1 about creation. That's wonderful. And there's lots of good stories of Genesis. I suppose that doesn't really get to the point, does it? You could have them read about Moses and Exodus, some good single chapters stories. We know people like stories a lot, but as Christians, we'd have to say there's something probably a little more central than that. You could, if your friend's a sci-fi nut, you could take him to Revelation, an end of history. And big point, do we have the number of chapters? 1189. I've only got time to read one chapter. I think you'd have to say, well, we want to get into Jesus and our central part of our faith. You could have him read something out of Romans. Paul talking the best theology in Scriptures in Romans. It's the most rounded about death and resurrection and what it means to be a faith. Problem is, it's pretty dry. I'm not sure you want to send someone into the heart of Paul with only one chapter. We'd rather they have part of the story. So I know what you're thinking. Let's go to the Gospels. Let's go to the Gospels. And of course, they'd know the Christmas story, but that's only one chapter. And that really, when you think about it, is a wonderful story, but doesn't get there. You'd probably like to have them have some sense of Jesus, what he's like, and you'd have some dialogue would be helpful. So while you want to do crucifixion, one of those chapters, that would be important, but I know what you're thinking. My pastor's very cross-centered, but shouldn't Easter be in here somewhere? And so if you go to Easter accounts, there's a chapter, but when you think about it, happy and glorious is that Jesus and Mary or the disciples running. Good stuff doesn't get at the heart of what faith is, does it? It's what happens to Jesus. I realized this week, if you're forcing me to pick one chapter that's a good story, that tells us who Jesus is, has some dialogue, and addresses the heart of our faith and theology, you got to go with John 11. I don't think there's anything that even comes close in comparison. It's the best teaching story of Jesus there is about the central doctrine of what we believe. That's where we're heading today. Don't forget John 11 when they ask you later this week. One chapter. All right. Tragedy plus time equals comedy, someone has said. I mean this in a Shakespearean sense. Comedies of Shakespeare, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, they have really sad parts, dramatic loss. But in the end, you go, wonderful. And you leave the theater feeling rested and like life is wrapped up. It's really a great thing. Tragedies, you leave Hamlet and Macbeth, you're all over the floor with the bodies thinking, that was hard, beautiful, but I don't know where it leads, and it's hard to pick up the lessons, and you think that tragedy. In our lives, tragedy and comedy. Someone has said, with enough time, those most difficult stories in your life and my life end up being rounded out in comedy. If you follow the life of Jesus from Mark, this is developmentally, Mark written first in about 70, Matthew and Luke about 80, 85, John not till 90, 95, our story moves from tragedy to comedy. Again, I'm not saying John is a thigh slapper. I'm saying John's Jesus knows what's going on, and everything that happens, just like in a comedy, you say, oh, I know what this is about. This will turn out later on. It's all going to work out, and in the end, everything's working out. Not Mark. Jesus is on the cross saying, my God, why have you abandoned me? And the women go to the tomb and there's no one there, and they run away, and you think, Now, arguably the story, I think, Mark might stick with you more because tragedy is like that. The initial accounts moving through the birth narratives of Matthew and Luke, a little more rounded. I'm bringing this up today because the question is, from where do you choose your Christology? What Jesus Christ was about historically. And it matters with how you answer some questions today. And wherever you are in a continuum, you can find biblical support for it. From a very human, fallible, tragic Jesus in Mark to a very divine, and that arrow is intentional. It gets higher and higher Christology, we say. Nothing in John happens but that Jesus knows about it. Jesus isn't crying out in dereliction on the cross. He's saying, Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Today, in prying some of that open is what we're up to. I want to talk about giving up on the way. Along the way for all of us, we have moments of just giving up, like the cat on your bulletin. We have episodes where we're feeling beaten down and we can't do it anymore. There's another bigger type of giving up that says, not only is this tragic right now, but I don't see it ever rounding out to comedy. It's one thing to have loss, suffering, physical ailments. Often we can make sense of those or hang on knowing this will last for but a season. Sometimes, and I think this might be the difference between sadness and depression, when we give up on there even being a way, and we think, there's nothing that makes sense of this. My life has no structure. There's no overarching theme where my present suffering is going to be redeemed and worked out. That is the second one. And if you've ever experienced that in your life, it's far worse than a single death, divorce, etc. It's a colossal, I no longer believe in a way. Christian faith is about seeing the comic and while still being with the tragic. We have in Job a great example of companions who try to bring Job along in his suffering by too quickly offering a comic conclusion. There must be some reason for your suffering. You did this thing wrong. You're a bad parent. God's in control. We know those are horrible answers for people in suffering. Those are trying to force someone in tragedy into comedy prematurely. At the same time, the Christian faith is about saying, no, even life itself, even history itself, eventually will be revealed to be a comedy. That's what we believe. That there's nothing that will fall outside of the sense of God's story, even all over. And that's an incredible proclamation, difficult to hang on to in the middle of the moment. But like with Siddhartha, there are moments in life, and especially when we're giving up, when we're invited to see not just our struggle, but a bigger struggle and say, wow, this is what it is to be a human, is to lose our way and to even lose sight of the beyond and the divine and to have a futility. And if we learn to recognize, my hope is when we learn to recognize that giving up on the capital way, we'd understand, I get where this comes from. This is also a situation of being in the human condition. Even with my tragic moment that feels like there's no comedy, this also might be held somehow by God. It drives Siddhartha to his moments of great insight in the book. It's wanting to fall into the river and drown and end it all when Siddhartha experiences the Om moment and knows peace and satisfaction. If you haven't finished it yet, as we get to the end of the book, spoiler alert, there is transformation. And even his friends come and say, you've achieved it, haven't you? You've found peace, even in the middle of all this loss and meaninglessness. And Siddhartha, again, the cycle is enlightenment and then another struggle. And his struggle especially is about parenting at the end. He's confronted with his son. And his struggle then comes in a new way. Maybe there's no point to all of it. And yet again, there is a peace that passes understanding at the end of Siddhartha. And that external people recognize in him, he becomes something. Next week, we're going to talk about becoming the way, our own lives being the example for others. We make the road by walking it. We believe, in fact, we don't believe just in Jesus Christ. we believe that we are Christ for others. Siddhartha understands what it is to become Buddha-like for others, to be in life. It's an important central theme. It is not easy. But we wrap up Siddhartha next week. And then 2 weeks out, and for a few weeks we talk about Reformation, because we are finally now at the 500-year anniversary. It's starting to leak into the news, and we're going to come back to our ancestors and where we are in reforming. In Luke, the passage that Elaine just read, and we come to the central part of Jesus' story in one way. And the question is like a mystery question. What did he know and when did he know it? The question is like a political question we're going to be faced with as we kind of repeat seemingly kind of the Nixon era of a president who's got criminal activity all around him. Probably not that he did. The question will arise then, okay, what did he know and when did he know it? One of the reasons why, by the way, I read quite a bit. I don't read mysteries. I don't like mysteries. That's an odd thing given my Christian faith. I don't read them because mysteries too prematurely pretend that we're in a tragedy when I know they're creating comedy. I'm supposed to be writing and supposed to be reading along and discovering clues about how it all rounds out nicely, when I know life isn't like that. Often the clues you find don't lead to. And so I resent when I read a mystery, this being forced into a comic role when I know this is, okay, so she did it because she knew. When did he know? Okay, fine. It doesn't, I don't like it. What did he know? What did Jesus know? It's a question of agency and control, intention. Jesus makes some enemies in this text because they say, what are you doing? Don't go to Jerusalem. Don't you know they're after you? And he says, you got to go. And the question I'm asking, and in your answer you're thinking, are you relying on Mark, Matthew, Luke, or John? When Jesus turns his face to Jerusalem, is he a fool? Making a tragic error? That would be Mark's view. Is he a divine God? I'm turning so I can go die on a cross and rise on the third day. There's John. Is he a little more Matthew, Luke? Something in between. I'm turning, there's danger, I don't know everything, but I'm going to give myself to it anyway. It's in this middle stage about agency that I'm very intrigued what Jesus knew, what he saw written on the walls, what he walked into, what he was mistaken by and disappointed by, versus what he knew was up. And he says to them, look, you got to go. No one who sets their hand to the plow and looks back is worth anything. Because if you're plowing and you look over your shoulder, you're going to steer poorly. I think of that every time I back out of my driveway. Many of you have backed out of my driveway. And I throw my arm over the seat and go, oh, we got to do more yoga in the morning because that hurts. And I can't quite see far enough. And you got to go and you got to give yourself to it even if you don't know what's up. I'm going to come to bring peace. I'm going to separate a mother from a daughter-in-law. I'm going to, foxes have places to hide. If you're able to supper, you don't. All right. Where do you choose your Christology from? Is Jesus giving in to the way? Luke seems to suggest this in-between path. Jesus may know he's making enemies because of it, because they want to protect him, but he says we got to go. Where do you draw your idea of agency from? And in your life as well, what are we up to with disciples? All right. Finishing with John, turn to John 11. What I think is, the most important chapter in the book in your hand.